Okay, we have Ben Goertzel here, and we're here to discuss the Turing Test and some recent news that has been going around saying the Turing Test has been officially passed. Although there has been many attempts at the Turing Test in the past, there were reports that the Turing Test has been passed before, but it seems as though this cycle has been the official passing of the Turing Test. Have you any comments on the recent news about the passing of the Turing Test by Eugene Goostman, the chatbot?
Well, the chatbot in question, I believe, was named
Yeah.
Eugene Goostman, and in my view, this is essentially a bogus event, which is trumped up by someone's PR agent in an attempt to get some excitement about their work. I mean, there's been no significant advance that has happened here. The Turing Test, as conceived by the AI pioneer Alan Turing in the paper from 1950 called Computing Machinery and Intelligence, I think. I mean, the Turing Test is an imitation game where a computer is supposed to hold a conversation by text and pretend it's a person. And if it can fool human judges into believing it's a person, then, according to Turing's idea when he proposed this test in 1950, then we should consider it to be as intelligent as a person because it can fool humans into believing that it's a person in a text chat context. And it was very forward thinking of Turing to have this idea in 1950. He did say somewhere that, yeah, if a machine could fool 30% of people, that would be pretty amazing. And he forecast, I believe, by the year 2000, there'd be a machine that could fool 30% of judges. And Turing made pretty explicit in his paper that he wasn't thinking too much about how this game might be gamed and manipulated, what would be the optimal strategy for a computer program in this game. He was really making more of a conceptual point that intelligence should be judged in terms of behavior, so that if a computer could behave like a person and act like a person and do stuff like a person, then we should consider it as intelligent as a person. Whereas some might say, well, it doesn't matter what the computer can do. If it doesn't have a human brain, that it doesn't have the soul, it doesn't have the essence of human consciousness, it's not really intelligent. Well, I think the Turing Test was considered to make a philosophical point. It wasn't carefully sculpted as a kind of cheating-proof exam. It would be very hard to have done that in 1950 when, if you think about it, computers could hardly do anything. Computers at that point consisted of, basically room-sized calculators for doing arithmetic, more like an old-fashioned programmable calculator that was as big as your living room. So thinking about these issues at all in 1950 was amazing. Turing was a genius. It's not surprising he didn't think about exactly the ways in which people might play funny little tricks with the imitation game that he proposed. So, I mean, you fast forward to 2014, and what we see is now, for what may be the first time, an officially assembled collection of judges has been fooled by some chatbot more than 30% of the time. Now, a few years ago, this same chatbot fooled 29% of judges, and in 2008, a chatbot called Lbot fooled 30% of judges in a similar context. So, of course, the movement from 29 or 30% to 33% is just noise. I mean, there's going to be random fluctuation in the makeup of judges. Some judges are more naive than other judges are. It's pretty clear to anyone who knows anything about AI and chatbots and dialogue systems that this chatbot doesn't understand anything. I mean, it doesn't understand the meaning of the words that it's talking about. What it has is a bunch of clever mechanisms programmed in for changing the subject when it doesn't understand something. Some questions it can answer based on databases that it has in its memory. Some questions it can answer based on things that it recorded during the conversation. Say, what's your name, Ben? Oh, hi, Ben. How are you doing? What's the capital of Ethiopia? Addis Ababa. So questions like that can be answered without any real thinking. On the other hand, if you ask, what's the capital of Africa? Addis Ababa. Have you ever been there? Now, if it doesn't have a program response to that, it will just change the subject and say, have you?
Do you think
It might have a program
Eugene
response.
Do you think Eugene Goostman is listening into this conversation and quietly reveling in all his fame and glory is received all over the media somewhere on the internet, brooding in the dark corners of the internet, calculating and ways to get back at the naysayers?
Well, I think the other clever part of what these guys did is they made the chatbot be a foreign 13-year-old boy, because that way if the English is screwed up, you'll kind of be forgiven. You'll be forgiving because it's a kid from another country, right? So that is actually even a bit of a cheat relative to how the original Turing test was phrased. I mean, it's supposed to fool you into thinking you're a human, but then what kind of human? A comatose human? I mean, I can make a chatbot that'll have a conversation exactly like a comatose human who can't type anything. So choosing a foreign kid and fooling people into thinking you're a foreign kid is a bit of a cheat, in the same way that fooling people into thinking you're a retarded or insane person would be a cheat. So that's sort of a funny little cheat on top of just the typical cheats involved with chatbots of writing code to divert the conversation from things you don't understand. I mean, I think that it's an interesting theatrical achievement. I'm not sure it's the greatest theatrical achievement of any chatbot. There's been a lot of chatbots out there that have done about as well as this one within the margins of statistical significance. But it's interesting that people can be fooled by a simple collection of rules. But I mean, we already know people are easy to fool. That's what stage magic is based on, right? I mean, you and I can watch a guy on stage pull a rabbit out of a hat, and we'll really feel like we're watching him pull a rabbit out of a hat. Yet, if you watch what was happening from a bunch of video cameras played slowly, you would see the guy pull the rabbit out of his sleeve. But somehow we're misdirected from looking at that because of the way our perception systems work. And our systems for interpreting conversations are kind of the same way. We're easily misled by something that goes along with enough of our expectations and directs our attention in a certain way. That's all interesting from the perspective of human psychology. Unfortunately, it's not really a step along the path to building human-level thinking machines. I mean, there is a community of serious researchers aimed at trying to make machines that can think and hold conversations like people. We have a conference coming up August 1st through 4th, the AGI, Artificial General Intelligence Conference, that we have each year. And one thing I would note is that these annual conferences focused on building thinking machines that can really think like people. At these conferences, chatbots like Eugene Goostman's never come up. I mean, they don't even come up to laugh at them or talk about how irrelevant they are, because they're just understood by common sense, by all researchers, to have nothing to do with really making thinking machines. I mean, the basic problem is these chatbots, if you look inside them, they have a bunch of software code to do with the actual words in the sentence. Like, if someone says, "How are you doing?" then respond, "I am fine." If someone asks, "When is your birthday?" then say, my birthday is blah blah, or say, well, why do you want to know? That's only for my friends. I mean, their internals are based on text, whereas, of course, in a thinking machine, some way or another, the text has to be used to stimulate some other type of non-textual representation. Could be the state of some neural network, could be propositions in some logic system, but somehow text is translated into ideas, concepts, some kind of reaction or organization patterns, not just rules to go from text in, text out. It's just so obvious that these chatbots have nothing to do with the way intelligence works, that at an AI research conference, they're not really even part of the game. I would say these things only have to do with AI at this stage in the popular media. Now, an interesting twist on this was provided by Ray Kurzweil's bet with Mitch Kapor. They bet that by 2029, Kurzweil bet that a chatbot would be able to impersonate a human being correctly in the view of 2/3 of judges in a 2-hour conversation. Kapor bet that by 2029, no chatbot, no dialogue system would be able to fool 2/3 of judges into thinking it was human in a 2-hour conversation. Now, that's a different kind of test, not just because it's 2/3, but in 2 hours, you can go through a lot more than in 5 minutes or so. And the fact that something is not a real human and not a real intelligence is going to become more apparent during 2 hours. But I wouldn't be sure that someone could make a chatbot to fool 2/3 of judges over a 2-hour period either. I mean, I think fooling 2/3 of educated judges who know something about AI for 2 hours would be really hard. But fooling 2/3 of people off the street, maybe you can just entertain them with BS for 2 hours. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of like the difference between convincing random people that you're really pulling a rabbit out of a hat, who may be very superstitious, credulous people, or fooling 2/3 of a panel of stage magicians that you're really doing Harry Potter style magic and not just some sleight of hand. The latter is going to be a lot harder, right? Because the stage magicians know the kinds of tricks that you're able to pull to play with human expectation. So in the end, this business of fooling people is kind of funny, but it may not quite make the philosophical point that Turing wanted to make. I mean, Turing was trying to make a point about functionalism. He was trying to make a point that if you walk like a duck and quack like a duck and look like a duck and you breathe like a duck and you hunt fish like a duck, we may as well call you a duck. So, I mean, if you can talk like a human and answer questions like a human, take an exam like a human, compose a poem like a human, prove a theorem like a human, tell a love story like a human, do all these things like a human being, then we should consider you to be intelligent like a human. We shouldn't just say, even though you can react and do everything a human being can, just because you're made of metal, not of blood and flesh, we're going to say you're fake. And Turing was trying to argue against that. So he was thinking about a chat system that could, prove a theorem or compose a sonnet or tell the story of its first love relationship and do all these things like a human can. He wasn't really thinking about how easy would it be to make a system that would avoid doing all the hard things by clever conversational tricks and redirect the conversation to the small number of things it could talk about. So I think the crux of the matter is, A, Eugene Goostman's just did better than other chatbots by random chance and some naive judges and some extra trickery of impersonating a 13-year-old boy. But B, even setting aside those points, tricking a bunch of naive people doesn't really mean much of anything, any more than pulling a rabbit out of a hat proves that you're Harry Potter. And in the end, Turing was proposing a thought experiment to make a point about functionalism and behavior intelligence rather than really proposing an exam that should be used as a litmus test. And if Turing were resurrected, or when a Turing robot is reconstructed from all of his writings to emulate the mind of Alan Turing, he will be very amused by Eugene Goostman's. But I suspect that this uploaded reconstructed Turing would have roughly the same attitude that I am projecting here in this interview.
Fair enough. So you don't think the Turing test was designed for chatbots in mind? It was meant to sort of designed to discover AIs that have the cognitive complexity to have a real conversation rather than fake it, rather than just like a chatbot designed to, I guess, optimize to fool people into thinking that it's a real person rather than actually have a real conversation.
Yeah, and the Turing test wasn't really designed rigorously as a test by Turing either. I mean, it was sort of proposed as a thought experiment. But yeah, I think it was certainly wasn't, when Turing invented it, he wasn't thinking about this sort of way of tricking and working around the rules and limitations of the test, and how could he in 1950, really?
Mm-hmm. That's right. So let's just say the world decides that this is the line in the sand, and this is the milestone that, like, now the Turing test has officially been passed. What do you think this means? Is this a symbolic milestone that can be used for any purpose?
I think that if this means anything, it could be the nail in the coffin of the Turing test. In other words, the fact that this system that obviously has no intelligence has passed the official formulation of the Turing test in some sense, although that's certainly quite arguable given the whole 13-year-old boy thing. This may just convince people once and for all that the Turing test is an irrelevancy, and no one should think or worry about it anymore as we progress toward more and more intelligent machines. So if there's any significance to this beyond the next couple days of media hoo-ha, which I kind of doubt, but if there is any significance, it will be a nail in the coffin of the Turing test. I don't think there is any way that anyone will consider this a real milestone in the path toward making human-level thinking machines. I mean, it isn't. It's easy to get people's attention for a few minutes because everyone's busy and people don't always have the time to look into something to see what it is when it passes through their inbox or their news feed. But there's nothing here to stand up to scrutiny.
So you're not worried that we're approaching some form of chatter-ocalypse, or the last whimpers of humanity are being extinguished in some cacophony of chatbot noise?
Well, when the chatbots are connected to a nuclear weapons arsenal, there would be the possibility that some hand-coded rule, "Hello, how are you doing? Nuke Moscow," and then we're all gone. Then when the aliens land on the Earth a few thousand years from now, all they find is a bunch of meaningless chatbots responding to their alien conversation with pre-programmed if-then rules. But no, I don't think that's particularly likely.
The epitaph of humanity. we're survived by a bunch of unintelligent chatbots blabbing about nothing in particular for the time and all eternity. That would be particularly unfortunate. But yeah, what a way to go. Yeah, so it's certainly been a media circus recently. It does seem as though there's been a lot more attention brought to the Turing test through this, though, compared to other sort of attempts at passing the Turing test, like the Clever Bot in 2011. You mentioned another one earlier. This one seems to me as though it's got a lot more media hype surrounding it. Why? Why do you think this is so?
Well, it's not obvious to me why this particular chatbot has gotten more media hype. I mean, it may be the passing the 30% mark seemed exciting to people, and it could be that their PR agency was just more effective and got the press release out to more places. I think that the Loebner Prize happens every year, so the media may be kind of sick of the Loebner Prize by now, which is the primary Turing Test competition each year. It may also be that the world is primed for news about AI right now, in the sense that Google bought DeepMind for $500 million. Facebook and Baidu have been making major initiatives in the AI space, so AI has been in the media a lot lately. There's a particular feeling that the path to AI is clearer than it was, say, 5 or 10 years ago. Now, there's a lot of problems with the kinds of AI that are being pursued by these mega corporations as well, which is a long topic that I guess I won't go into in this interview. But I would say, whatever the shortcomings of the deep learning systems being pursued by Google, Baidu, Facebook, and so forth, at least these deep learning systems that these big companies are pursuing, these are doing some kind of learning and thinking. I mean, I'm a skeptic those approaches can lead us to human-level thinking machines, but I think they're addressing some part of the problem of building human-level thinking machines. Whereas I think a chatbot like Eugene Goostman's is not addressing any part of the problem of making human-level thinking machines. It's just a theatrical occurrence off in a corner. But I do think, due to the commercial success of these deep learning systems and deep learning oriented startups, which are addressing some portion of the real AI problem via working on visual perception and other related sorts of pattern recognition, I think that has brought more media attention to AI in general, and that may have primed the media for paying attention to this. But again, I think to make a real impression, you need two things. I mean, you need the surface appeal and the immediate excitement, which Eugene Goostman has gotten, but then you also need there to be something that withstands scrutiny once the excitement has gotten people to pay attention. And I think there's nothing here to withstand scrutiny. So this particular little blip on the publicity radar is going to go away, as it well should.
Well, say that the Turing test is done and dusted, and if it doesn't go away, is there any particular approaches that you'd like to discuss which you think are very useful in determining cognitive complexity and whether a machine can really think? And are you on any board or any sort of a project that is designed to sort of work out the rules of such a test?
Yeah, the notion of the question of how to measure the IQ of a proto-AGI system. So how would you measure the intelligence of a system that is part way there to being a human level general intelligence, but not all the way there? That's quite a subtle question, actually. I mean, I think that measuring whether a system has achieved human level AI, whether it is truly as smart as a human being, I don't think that's particularly hard, although the Turing test has its flaws. I mean, I'm a fan of what I call the robot college student test. I mean, if we could if we could take an AI system and use it to control a robot that went to university and passed the university, got its diploma, so it's got to go around to all the different classes, sit in the class, listen to the professor, get the test, do the homework, and then graduate with its diploma, having followed the same rules that people did. I mean, if an AI could pass the robot college test, I would be willing to say it was functionally the same as a human being. And I think that's in the spirit of Turing's original test. I mean, that's what Turing really meant, is if it could behave like a person, then we should consider it to be as smart as a person. And I think that he misunderstood the degree to which people could game a 5-minute chat conversation, because, chat wasn't a thing in 1950. He didn't understand it that well. But to game actually passing college will be a lot harder, because that's something that was originated in order to test whether people really could learn and do something. And so college has a lot of cheating-proof mechanisms built into it already, right? I mean, because that's because people will try to cheat it also. So that raises some interesting questions. I mean, would you let the robot use internet connection while taking an exam in its calculus or history class? Because people generally aren't allowed to, right? I mean, you'd really want the robot to obey the same rules that people did. And you can imagine variants of that test, like an online college student test. Could it pass online university in the same way that a person would? But there you have a few more potentials for cheating, because I mean the AI could just open a chat window and ask someone at each step exactly what to do, right? Which is not what people would do to pass an online college exam, but is something you might be able to do to pass the exam. And this is pretty much because online college is new, and the anti-cheating mechanisms are not as well refined as they are at MIT or some in-person college. So yeah, I think one could come up with tests that would measure the achievement of human level intelligence reasonably well, and then there's always a struggle of the ways to cheat versus the ways to really pass the test in the spirit of a test. But measuring whether you're halfway there is harder. Are you halfway to achieving human level intelligence? Are you 25% of the way? And to be honest, I haven't thought of a great way to do that. I mean, Peter Diamandis has thought of a very showy and exciting way to do that, which is his AI TEDx prize, or not TEDx as in the conference spin-offs, but the X prize at the TED conference. His idea is, if an AI can give a TED talk within certain restrictions, so it gets the topic of the TED talk 20 minutes beforehand, and then gets up on stage and gives the talk. His idea is, if an AI can do that, then it should be considered to have passed some kind of proto-intelligence test. So it's got to give a talk on a topic that was randomly given to it 20 minutes before, and then answer some questions based on its talk afterward. And that's an interesting test. It's kind of hard. I mean, if you took the average gas station attendant in Peoria and asked them to give a TED talk on a random topic with 20 minutes to prepare, they'll do a pretty poor job. But I mean, that's good theater, and it tells you something. I don't think it's an awesome test in the sense that, a 5-year-old kid would do a terrible job at that, but the 5-year-old kid is still a long way there toward a human level of general intelligence. So I think there are many different potential pathways to human level general intelligence, and each pathway will go through different intermediate steps. Some pathways might go through AIs that could give a TED talk. Other pathways might be more focused on perception and motor manipulation and childlike development, and might not pass through a state where they could give a TED talk until they're basically at the end. So I'm not sure there is a way to make a good test of being 30%, 50%, 80% of the way there to general intelligence. I think that there are flawed but meaningful ways to measure whether you're already there at the level of human level general intelligence. But basically, I think once you're there at the level of human level general intelligence, it'll be obvious to everyone that you're really there, and these tests will be kind of beside the point. I mean, if we have a system that can really think like you and me without a bunch of bullshit, it'll be able to do a lot of human jobs. It'll be able to hold a conversation in many different contexts that's qualitatively like human conversation. And yeah, there may be some people who will say this thing isn't really intelligent because it's not human, doesn't have exact human emotions, but that's kind of beside the point. That's in the same category as how my grandfather never wanted to get money from the ATM. He always wanted to see a human bank teller. I mean, some people will never want to accept AGIs, even after they're obviously more intelligent than people. But that's kind of beside the point. And I kind of feel like these tests are eternally going to be beside the point, because there's no way to make a really good test for how far you are along the path to AGI, because there are many different paths which could go through many different routes. On the other hand, once you're really there, the test is irrelevant, because that doesn't matter. What ultimately matters is, can it discover new things? Can it take over human jobs? Can it be intelligent in practice in real society? And whether or not that's rigorously defined, once you can do that, the tests don't matter so much. I mean, just as an IQ test doesn't matter nearly as much as what a human being can do in the world.
So I think the Turing test is sort of useful for general public to get like an idea of where machine intelligence is at, if it's been applied correctly. But I mean, if all these types of tests are irrelevant in a sense, then what indicators can we use to know that we're progressing towards, or to be at least confident that we're progressing towards like a superhuman intelligence, or some form of like AI that compares to our own intelligence? Is there anything?
Well, I think that making an indicator of progress in terms of how many different aspects of human intelligence have we managed to handle, how well. Making such a qualitative progress indicator is one thing, and making a test, which is more like a game that people can engineer a system for, is a different thing. I mean, once you've made a test and said the goal is to do better than 30% or 80% on this test instrument, then people can set about figuring out how to game the test. I mean, just like with an IQ test, if you spend 5 years in IQ test training school and then do better on that IQ test, that doesn't really mean you're smarter. It means you were well trained for the IQ test. But that doesn't mean that the IQ test didn't have some meaning in the wild as a way of assessing the intelligence of people who weren't trained for the IQ test. So I mean, I think if you look at the scope of human abilities, say recognizing objects and events, recognizing speech, answering questions, walking down the street, proving math theorems, looking at patterns in data, all the different things that people do. If you looked at each of those things, they're measures of how well computer programs can do each of those things. Usually it's not very well, but it's certainly better than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So you could look at this sort of composite index of how well computer programs are doing at achieving various kinds of human-like intelligence. You would see that these things are all improving, and that sort of indicator means something intuitively to me, but it's hard to nail down into one single number. And to me, that's okay. I don't need to have a number saying I'm 27% of the way there today, and I was 23% of the way there yesterday. I mean, usually when these numbers are made up, they're misleading anyway. Like say in economics, can they make up the Gini index to measure inequality, the degree of inequality in the country? Okay, that's one number. And it may kind of mean something. I mean, it says the U.S. is more unequal than Iceland, all right. But really, it doesn't tell you what you need to know to assess the degree of inequality in the country. It's ultimately not terribly useful. And it's unclear to me how valuable such indexes really are compared to having a number of different quantities measuring different aspects of the phenomenon you're studying. Anyhow, to me as a researcher, it doesn't feel necessary to have some synthetic index of the degree of progress. I think that researchers are each going to go according to their own qualitative understanding of progress, and different researchers will have different intuitions of what constitutes progress, and I mean that's okay. From the general public's perspective, I actually think the general impression of AI in all regards, I mean the fact that Facebook can recognize your face in a picture, and the fact that we have chatbots like Siri and Google Now and Cortana that can respond with some understanding to some questions. The fact that there are self-driving cars driving around in San Francisco and other places in the world. I mean, this qualitative impression of computers gradually taking over more and more functions that people did is much more important than whether we're doing 33%, 30%, 28% on whatever formally defined test. So yeah, I don't care that much about tests. I'm not sure that researchers or ordinary people do. I think it may be that news reporters like it because it gives something crisp they can put in a headline, but ultimately that's not too relevant to the actual progress that's going on.
Sure. Well, I mean, a lot of people would suggest that it's useful to test the feasibility of human-level AI, but also useful to make some form of projection about the timeline of AI. If there are no reliable or valuable indicators on the way AGI is going, then should we prepare to be surprised when it does come along?
Well, I think that AGI is not at a sufficiently advanced stage, nor sufficiently well defined for there to be something like a Moore's law, where we can say that, you know, this particular aspect of semiconductors has advanced by a factor of 2 every 18 months or something, right? I mean, that's a fairly quantitative projection we can make, and I think that AGI it's not at that stage right now. I mean, similar to how, you know, neuroscience isn't at that stage right now. We can say neuroscience is advancing tremendously. We understand more and more about the brain each year than we did the previous year. We understand way more than we did 5 years ago. But how will you put a number on how much more do we understand about the brain this year than 5 years ago? That would be quite arbitrary to quantify how neuroscience has advanced. Yet it's very clear that neuroscience has advanced. I mean, even something more basic, like it's obvious medicine has advanced. How do we quantify how medicine has advanced? How many diseases we can cure based on before? How many people's complaints at the doctor's office we can remedy? I mean, these are all very fuzzy things. You could have many different ways to define them. And I think not everything is as crisply defined as the rate of processing of a semiconductor or the amount of memory in a hard drive. And that doesn't mean these other things like neuroscience, medicine, or AGI are bullshit. It just means they're a little fuzzier in their quantification and definition. so that it's harder to draw a Moore's law-like chart about progress. Now, does that mean that it's harder to project the rate of advance of these things? Maybe. It may mean that it's harder to make a sort of probabilistic lower bound. I think with some level of certainty we can say we're probably not going to fall that far behind Moore's law since we've been following it for a while. We could hit a bottleneck. We're probably not going to fall that far behind it. Whereas there's no projection like that we can use to sort of probabilistically lower bound the rate of advance of medicine, neuroscience, or AGI. On the other hand, the upper bound of the progress rate of any of these things is much harder to say. I mean, it could happen in 5 years from now. Someone makes quantum computing practical in a way that blows the hell out of Moore's law by going just so fast for many kinds of computation. And it could be also that, you know, my OpenCog project or someone else's AGI project makes a huge advance in AI, and, you know, suddenly in 5 years we have a human-level thinking machine that can really think. And similarly in neuroscience, it could be someone makes a new kind of brain scanning device, say a way to drill a little hole in the head to put some carbon nanotubes snaking through the brain to, without causing any damage, gather full information on what's happening inside the skull, gather this data into a huge database, analyze it all. We really understand what's happening in the brain. So that in any of these fields, whether you have a Moore's law type quantitative extrapolation or not, in any of these fields, there's the possibility of a dramatic breakthrough that accelerates progress tremendously, and we don't have a way to figure that, and no test will give you a way to figure that. I mean, there will come a point when we have enough AGI that it's qualitatively obvious that we're close. I mean, I've referred to this as an AGI Sputnik event in the past. I mean, if we had a robot toddler that walked around like a little 3-year-old kid playing this stuff and talking to us in the not fully knowledgeable but obviously generally intelligent, inquisitive, and improvisatory way that a true young child does. If we had an AGI of that nature, I mean, whether or not it rigorously passed someone's test, we could qualitatively feel quite certain that this guy was on the path to AGI. But, you know, we're not there yet, and at the earlier stage we are now, it's very hard to come up with a rigorous estimate of progress. And again, to me, that's okay. We progress with medicine, neuroscience, and, you know, research on making better and better batteries. We progress with a whole lot of kinds of research because it's obvious there are many avenues for making progress out there. It's obvious that incremental progress is being made toward the goal, and we don't really need a quantitative test to measure our progress in a rigorous sense. That doesn't worry me.
Look, you know, like, so people, the general populace's opinion on artificial intelligence may, I guess, influence politics, which might, like, largely increase the funding for artificial intelligence, for instance. But human psychology doesn't deal with fuzz as well as it does with definites, and, you know, we naturally try to categorize things into more definite categories. So pitfalls aside, is there any use in communicating less reliable observational models of progress, like, you know, with graphs with easy lines and curves to understand on them, with regard to
Well,
AI?
I think that what causes people and funding agencies to want to put money into projects is fairly diverse. I mean, I don't think that big influxes of funding into a certain area are typically caused by graphs and charts. I mean, look at something like the Human Genome Project. That wasn't initiated by some graph of incremental progress on gene sequencing, and the recent burst of funding into neuroscience that we see with billions and billions going into neuroscience in the US, Europe, and Asia. I mean, that wasn't caused by some quantitation of the advance of progress in neuroscience. So I think people are more moved by some kind of emotional appeal on a qualitative level than by a bunch of dry graphs, charts, and figures. So probably Diamandis is going in the right direction with his robot giving it a TED talk. And the problem with the Eugene Goostman's type thing is that the theatrical appeal wears off quickly, as we saw with Siri. I mean, Siri's funny for the first few minutes. Then, similar to Eugene Goostman's, you figure out pretty quickly it doesn't have actual intelligence. It's not interesting to talk to, right? So, I mean, it may be useful for some purposes, for accessing some information, but the theater wears off quickly. But I think that good theater and emotionally moving hype is what moves funding. People funded the Human Genome Project because the biology community convinced them it would cure grandma's cancer, not because of some charts and figures. No, as it happens, it's been a while since that finished. It hasn't cured grandma's cancer yet. It was actually a much more long-term research gambit than it was portrayed as at the moment. But it was the emotional appeal attached to it that got people's attention, not the quantitative aspect. And that's I expect that will continue to be the case. I mean, I'm a mathematician. I love numbers and charts and figures, but I mean, at the same time, my quantitative background makes me less of a fan of bogus quantitative charts and figures that don't really mean anything. So I think there's not much motivation to me to pursue these methods of quantitating my interim progress, and I don't think that's really necessary. I mean, I think that the fact that Facebook could recognize human faces 97.3% of the time, whereas some Chinese startup software can recognize faces 97.2% of the time on the same benchmark. I mean, that's nice for academics publishing papers. In the end, what matters to people is that whenever they upload a picture, they see Facebook can draw a little box around it and recognize who it is. I mean, that's the qualitative emotional impact, that the functionality is real, that the AI can do something that means something to them emotionally. I think that's really what matters.
Well, let's just say you were testing let's just say this Eugene Goostman is sentient. What would you ask
It's not, but it's not sentient.
Okay, right. So if you were on a panel, on a panel to for a Turing test panel, what question would you ask Eugene Goostman, who you didn't know was an AI or a human yet? What question would you ask? On a lighter note.
Adam, there's no single question that you could ask a chatbot to determine it's a chatbot, because any single question could always be part of the programming. It could always have the answer programmed in. So what you would want to do is ask follow-up questions to see if it really understood what it was talking about. So I mean, if you ask it, you know, have you ever been to the capital of Ethiopia? And it says no. You said, you know what the capital is? Well, it's Addis Ababa. Then you'd say, well, do you think that Addis Ababa has as many Rolex watch stores as Hong Kong? Probably you'd say no. Then now, which sounds more like the sound a little baby would make, Addis Ababa or Hong Kong, right? Now, most humans would guess Addis Ababa because babies go ba 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 ba, right? But the AI probably isn't programmed to look at the term Addis Ababa that way. If you ask it, you know, what does it feel like to wake up in the morning, right? And what does it say? I always feel good to wake up in the morning. Then you say, well, do you ever feel a bit groggy and fuzzy-headed when you wake up in the morning? You know, it might say yes, it might say no, it might say some bullshit. Let's say that it says, well, yes, sometimes before my first morning cup of coffee. Then you might say, well, how do you compare how you feel when you first woke up in the morning to how you feel after you've taken a toke on some weed, right? And then, I mean, A human being might react to that in any number of ways, but eventually when you follow up trying to go into more and more depth on what it talked about, it's going to reveal that it doesn't understand that word or that thing in all its aspects. It's going to say something intended to divert attention to some other topic of conversation. And the thing is, because we're polite, we tend to follow the other person when they divert the topic. When they say, well, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? Well, all right, I've had my first cup of coffee. What kind of coffee do you like? Our tendency is to answer, well, I don't drink coffee, or I prefer some fresh brewed Java or something. Our tendency isn't to say, well, let's not talk about that. I really want to know about your state of mind when you wake up in the morning. Do you find it harder to remember mathematics, right? How much harder would you find it to multiply 2 times 7 when you wake up? Our tendency, because we're polite, is just to go where our conversation partner leads us, rather than to push back and drill them on something they seem to not want to answer. But if you do drill them on the thing they seem to be evading from, the chatbots will fall apart every time. And a person may sometimes fall apart, but usually not. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I was going to try and enter a question in. I was having a chat with Eugene Goostman a while ago, but unfortunately he's not there. He's been replaced by an Apache Tomcat error.
yeah, it seems to be overwhelmed with hits. I guess there's been a
Exactly.
lot of people accessing it. So, unfortunately, I've got to head off and spend some time pursuing the creation of actual thinking machines. So,
Well, it's been great having you, Ben, and looking forward to another conversation in the future. All right.
all right, I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye. Okay.